Thank you again, and I'll hand it over to our moderator, Kole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace, and welcome to each and every person who was able to join us from all parts of the country, from all other parts of the world as well, to this very important occasion put together by three institutions, Leap Africa, the Ford Foundation, and the MacArthur Foundation. We are very excited for having all of you this afternoon. My name is Kole Shettima. I work with the MacArthur Foundation based here in Abuja. And I would like to also to introduce our distinguished panelists. I want to say that I think Grace is going to also share her a link to the bios of these distinguished panelists. So in order to save time, I'll just say a few words as to who these persons are. First on my list is Sara Egbo, who is a lead at Gender Mobile. Sara is a distinguished Nigerian who have worked in many places, and I noticed that actually she was in Zamfara, where she had an initiative on Queen Amina initiative, and she has done a lot of work around gender, technology, and other places as well. Sara also happens to be someone who has studied in many places, including her first degree in information resource management from Bako University in Ogun State, and a master's in gender and development from the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex. Among many other things, I think she got an award as the best Youth Corps member of the NYC scheme in Zamfara State for the work that she has done. She was also a British Shibni Scholar Awardee, where she did her master's degree as well. As I said, Sara has a very distinguished bio, and I would encourage everyone to go and read more about her. Our second panelist is none but other than Dr. Dabesaki, and Dabesaki have always advised us not to pronounce his second name so that we don't murder his name. So let me just stop at Dr. Dabesaki, who is a program officer with the Ford Foundation in the regional office based here, based in Lagos, the Center of Excellence. I'm not sure, why they call the place a Center of Excellence, but that's what they said. So we'll call them the Center of Excellence. Dabesaki, before joining the Ford Foundation, has been a consultant and has worked with a number of regional initiatives, including that of the African Union. Dabesaki has a PhD in international development and MA in development studies from the University of East Anglia, and then his first degree, education psychology, from the Rivers State College of Education. The last but not the least, actually, who probably is our host for this event, is none but Femi Taiwo, who is the director of Leap Africa, where he's responsible for overseeing all the programmatic, administrative, and strategy and program delivery of Leap Africa. Femi also comes with a distinguished intellectual background with a master's degree in innovation management and entrepreneurship from the Manchester Business School, and then his first degree from Community University, where he earned a first-class degree in computer science. I'm sure there must be something good about Covenant, because I was looking at the best students in our JAM results this year, and I think in the first 10, and I think that, like, I don't know, about the first 5 or so, all of them said they're going to Covenant University. So Femi must have gone to one of the best schools in Nigeria for that school to be recommended as well. So this is the bio of the distinguished panelists that we have, and I would like to start with you, Sara, because I think you are probably, well, you are the youth among us, I guess. I cannot say that of Femi or Dabesaki, but being the youth among us, probably we can start. But I don't know whether, okay, Dabesaki, maybe we should start with you, and I can say a few words about this work to give a global picture of why we are doing this work and why the launching is happening. Just to say that I think that the immediate reason why we have this seeded this fund, it really has to do in the Nigerian context, has to do with the NSAS movement. In the global context, it has to do with the Black Lives Matters. And I think that foundations like MacArthur and Ford and MacArthur, in some ways, we are very privileged institutions. And therefore, our leaders, got together and said, look, there are a lot of challenges the world is facing. And we as foundations, we have so many resources. Even though we have not really pushed our resources, we haven't put our resources specifically for COVID, we haven't thought about that. Why don't we go to the global market and borrow money and give it to people who probably are more hurt than us? So that was the context in which the Ford Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation and two and other three foundations went and borrowed money because of the belief that there are more people in the world that need money now, and therefore we should try to respond to that kind of situation. So in the Nigerian context, I think that the fact of the NSAT matters. One of the things that really brought to the focus, just as the Black Matters movement, is the inequality that have really shown and how young people are suffering as a result of the brutality of police and brutality and other things. So I would like to invite Dabesaki, who reached out and we started this conversation. Maybe, Dabesaki, you are in a better position even to give us some good sense of, why we are doing what we are doing today. Dabesaki.
Thank you, Kole, and thanks everyone for really making the time to be part of this conversation. I think you hit the nail in all the right places. The idea was really, the immediate motivation for the fund was really kind of building on the momentum that came out of the NSAS youth protest. But of course, there's a long history to, how we ended up in the NSAS protest, last year. And I think we've always talked about the idea of youth leadership and engagement. We've always talked about the idea of youth participation in development processes. It's a long, used refrain by many development actors. I think the challenge is often that this is underfunded. And, we saw it in the NSAS movement, where there was an extended period of youth protests across Nigeria, pushing for policy reform. If we take the agenda that they were pushing, in terms of ending police brutality as an entry point to policy reform, they were pushing for policy reform over an extended period of time. But once the protests, were abruptly disbanded by the authorities and individuals started to be targeted, we then saw that, we needed to do more. And there are two angles in which I thought we needed to do more. One was with regard to sustaining the momentum that was built by providing, resources that will enable young leaders and activists to continue to engage, in pushing for agendas that matter to them. The second is funding opportunities for proactive engagement with the state. Again, we wanted to move away from reactive engagement to one that is focused on trying to, formulate policies that will address the issues that matter to the young people. So as we will talk about later, Kole, the idea is really partly to ensure that in the event that young people wanted to engage at national and subnational level to shape policies, to help in the design of policies that are responsive to their needs, that they would have the resources to be able to do so.
Thank you very much, Dabesaki, for laying the foundation for this. And I think one of the things that you said, which is true, is that yes, the immediate is NSAS, but there is actually a long history of engaging young people in our things. And one of them, I think, is the Occupy movement, which I think in Nigerian context is very important. And that globally is the Occupy Wall Street was where that was how it was framed globally. In the Nigerian context, it was about Occupy Nigeria at that time. And so, Sara, given this experience of the movement itself, from NSAS to Occupy Nigeria and all the work that young people have been doing, where do you see us moving forward? What do you see as the next steps in this direction?
All right, thank you, Kole, for that question. Once again, it's a pleasure for persons to attend this event. So just to build on what Dabesaki has said, it's good that he touched on it, that this movement has been for a period of time. It's not something that started, matter of fact, last year or the year before. So I just want to point out first off that Nigeria has a rich history of collective youth activism, which goes as far back as the pre-independence period. In the history, Nigeria's history, you find out that a lot of persons who fought for independence of Nigeria, they were actually young people, in fact, and that goes to show that the concept of youth movement is not something that started today. And this movement, they brought to fore issues that mostly affected the youth, such as law enforcement brutality, youth unemployment, poor socio-economic development, limited political participation, gender inequality, amongst other reasons. And all this brought to light that, see, there are a lot of issues affecting the young people and they're not being listened to, or even if they are being listened to, not much is taken after that. So there is a line from a song that I believe a lot of youth are very conversant with. So I'm not going to say the whole song, but just the line from it. So there's this song which goes like this with the lyrics: parents, listen to your children. We are the leaders of tomorrow. So connecting that song to this question now, the parents in this case are those in positions of power, those in positions of authority, who are mostly elderly people, who are people that are older. And then the children can be likened to be us, the youth of the country. So it comes from a fact that for years, young people in particular, have been seeking to be listened to by the people in positions of power, in this case, who are actually parents, who are elderly persons. But they don't seem like they are being heard. They don't seem like their voices are being taken into account and decisions are made reflecting their inputs and also considering their nuances, considering the circumstances and providing solutions aimed at addressing youth-related issues. So based on that, that formed the impetus, or that gained the groundwork for movements such as the EndSARS, such as Occupy Nigeria, due to the fact that youth realized that with the existing structure or system in place, the tomorrow that you say in that song, that youth are the leaders of tomorrow, would never come to pass. So youth realized that see, in order for us to have our needs met, in order for us to have our voices heard, there's a need for us to take charge and ensure that we are not just the youth of tomorrow. In fact, we're the youth of today. In fact, to even bring much more closer with the youth of now. So based on that, that is how I see it. Based on that, there is that sense of awareness, and it's not just for an individual youth. In terms of it, you can see it as a collective form of awareness, and that is reflected in the movements that has happened over time, from pre-independence, dating back to this, bringing it forward to this very day. That shows that youth have woken up. They've seen that there's a need for actions to be done pertaining to addressing youth issues. So this movement also highlighted young people's agency. It also brought to fore the outstanding work that they're doing, the positive energy that they bring towards the development of this country, because a major form of the part of GDP or the nation's development can be attributed to youth activities. Young people are doing a lot of things for the development of this country, and it would be unfair to have their voices in the background when they need to be taken into account. So in terms of where it's headed next to, the movements have shown for a fact that youth are aware of what is happening. They want to be involved. They want their voices to be heard. They want to participate in the process from start to the end. In terms of the next steps, we see an organic and sustainable growth of movements. It must not necessarily be in terms of street protests. It can take other forms of advocacy, maybe in corporate spaces, in any kind of spaces they find themselves. And this is going to be a resilient movement, in the sense that it's not something that comes and goes, but something that goes through the period of time without an end. And then it comprises of persons that take ownership and they drive transformative process. There is also the increase, the continuous increase in the awareness of the collective, that they are responsible in taking charge of what is happening, and they have a say, they have every right to be part of contributing towards the development of the nation. It also shows that there is a consciousness in the nuances, in the context-specific need of each, because we know Nigeria is not a it's not a group that is just consisting of one set of people. There are differences here and there. This movement going forward is going to take into account those differences. It's going to be context specific and inclusive at the same time, and also unifying. So that's where I see the movement heading to in future. Thank you very much for giving me the audience.
Thank you, Sarah, for laying even the historical context. Both myself and Dabesaki were talking about last maybe 10 years, but I think you have gone back to the colonial period and the struggles for independence in Nigeria, because we all remember, example, the Dickies movement, one of the movement that were started by young people at that time as students, which evolved to the number of the political parties and associations that led the struggle for independence in our own part of the world. And I think that, we always also forget that actually when Gawan became our president or head of state, and he was 31 years old, which means that probably all of us here on the panelists were his senior by age when he became president. So many young people have played important and critical role in the history of the struggles for the independence of this country and for the development of the country. And I think that age-grade associations and others have been historically one of the forms in which people have come together to develop their own communities and their societies as well. The next question is for Femi, who, as I said, rightly probably is our host, because they are the one who are going to receive the money. So I think that, I think in making this decision, I think we all look at the history of LEAP's involvement with young people and with youth development. So maybe, Femi, you can start, not, of course, not the long history of it, but maybe you can summarize to us as to, if you are asked, why do we think that, what qualifies LEAP Africa to get this grant? I don't know, what will you say as a response to this? I can't hear you. I don't know.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Apologies for that. I said thank you so much, Dr. Kole, for the question, and Sarah and Dabesaki for the contribution so far. Like you rightfully said, LEAP has a rich history, over 19 plus years of working with young people and working with, on leadership development and youth development themes. We've been particularly focused on helping to build the basic knowledge of leadership and giving young people the opportunity, the space, and the platform to express and practice leadership. In fact, at the core of our mission is raising dynamic, innovative, and principled leaders. And over the past 19 years, we've been educating young people in different spheres, from secondary schools to universities and post-university youth, on what true leadership is, and also inspiring and equipping them and enabling them to practice leadership. For most of our work has been focused on working with young change makers and innovators. One of the things the NSAS movement did for us was to take a step back. Actually, prior to the NSAS movement in 2019, when we were looking at our new strategic direction, we decided that we were going to play a more active role in building the youth development ecosystem. We felt the over 2 decades of work and experience we've had is very useful in bringing the ecosystem and building the ecosystem. So we were excited when this conversation started with Dabesaki and of course with MacArthur to talk about the Nigerian Youth Fund. I think I want to just reflect very quickly on a piece by Batiliania. She's a scholar in social change, and he talked about how there are 3 critical roles that leaders have to play to drive social change in a nation or in a community. So we have the roles of agitators, we have the roles of innovators, and the role of orchestrators. So we know within the wider youth development and youth leadership ecosystem, some people are seen or have been positioned more as agitators. And every role is very important. Leap Africa has been working with innovators through our Social Innovators Program and other kinds of interventions we've been running for the past decade. But there's also the role of orchestrators. Being an ecosystem builder now helps us to take the place of connecting the dots, bringing the efforts of agitators, the efforts of innovators, and the efforts of other orchestrators together to champion the Nigeria that we want and the future that we want. So for us in Leap Africa, this is an exciting opportunity to advance our youth leadership development work beyond just working with social change leaders and innovators, to serving the role of an orchestrator and helping to connect the ecosystem, resource the ecosystem, build more capacity within the ecosystem to advance change in our nation.
Thank you, Femi, for this good presentation about the work that Leap Africa is doing, and also to identify the various categories that people can engage in terms of change and others. My next question to Sara and any other person who may want to talk about is that, this country has always think about development plans and ideas about what the future would look like. I mean, some of times, we develop 5-year plan, 10-year plan. We had, a Vision 2010, we have 2020, and now we are in the process of thinking about a bigger vision for the country. So if we are to project this country in 2050, and I think that time probably will have been, I'm trying to remember, the 3rd largest population in the world. What do we need to prepare for from a youth perspective? What are the things that we need to put in place in order for us to ensure that we have a secure future, a future that takes care of our young people, a future that promotes and protects our young people? Sara, do you want to start?
Yeah, I would like to start. So that's a very interesting question. I actually thought, why 2050? Why not 2030 or some other years? But I believe that shows the length of years which would give enough time for Nigeria as a country to achieve a lot of its dreams and aspirations for a better nation. So in terms of what Nigeria's young people need, there's a number of factors, but I'm just going to list a few of them. I believe this list is inexhaustive. So the first one is that for youth ownership to be effective and sustainable, young people need to be empowered, they need to be educated. And the education I'm talking about is not just the kind of education that you go to school, you go through the system and then you graduate. The kind of education I'm talking about is a kind of holistic education which equips you to perform both within the internal and external environments you find yourself, somewhere that no matter how difficult things might be, you are resilient. And also in line with that, the young people need to have their capacities built. They need to be strengthened in terms of the skills and knowledge that would enable them to effectively participate in whatever sector they find themselves in. If it's in terms of participation, if it's in terms of laying credits to their voices, if it's in terms of partnerships, young people need to be equipped with those skills and knowledge that will enable them to stand out and achieve the goals and objectives that they set for themselves. There is also the need for mentorship, because we've seen instances where a lot of people are being mentored and they do outstanding because they have someone who have showed them the ropes, right? So in this case, we have a lot of young people. It doesn't have to be someone elderly. Young people can also mentor other young people. We have a lot of young, outstanding people who are doing excellent work, and these young people can pass the baton down to people who are coming up the ladder in order to have their knowledge, their skill sets, their learnings, their experiences game be improved. And there is also the need for effective collaboration. There's also the need for strategic mobilization. These are just a few points of mine that I feel that youth should be able to take into account in order to equip themselves for 2015. Then in addition to this, young people need to learn how to design location-compliant communication. and context-specific interventions when you're looking at it from the organizational perspective, actually. Because if you want to develop, if you want to bring positive change to a place, you don't just do it based on your own understanding. You have to take into consideration what is the context like for that area, intended area, and the beneficiaries as well. That also has to be looked at. Then at the broader perspective, there's a need for structural reform. Like I'd mentioned in response to the first question asked, due to the existing structure, youth have realized that the structure that is in existence would not work for them. So in order for youth voices to be heard, in order for their aspirations to be implemented, there's a need for structural reform. And there's also the need to include more persons in positions of authority, in spheres of influence, where they can serve as representatives for their fellow youth members and also air their opinions to ensure that things are done well. And also, in terms of opportunities such as this, now that we're talking about the Nigerian Youth Fund Futures Launch, it is also a very, very credible opportunity for youth to have all these opportunities harnessed, to have their skills brought to the fore through platforms and organizations that tap into this youth fund to enable the capacity building of persons to be able to achieve their fullest potential. So in terms of challenges or issue, I've already spoken about the system. The current system limits a lot of things, and this breeds issues, things like poor education and the lack of limited or economic opportunities. Having such an opportunity as the Nigerian Youth Futures Fund is a very, very excellent platform to enable things like capacity building, mentorship, and the likes to be attained. There's also the challenge of limited participation, right? And collaboration and co-creation of knowledge. Again, this draws back to the fund. With the support from this fund, I believe that will be addressed and achieved in positive light. Then in terms of opportunities, moving on to opportunities, technology is a very, very good front, a very, very strong opportunity for you to leverage. We can see how it played a major role in ensuring that our voices were heard during the EndSARS protests, during the Not Too Young to Run, during the Occupy Nigeria, and so many other movements. Technology is something that should never be underestimated because it's powerful. It doesn't just amplify our voices at the national level, but even at the international level. And then we also have the backing of a large youth population. Our population is quite immense and there's strength in numbers. So there's a need for us to see that as an opportunity that as we are a huge group, there is a need for us to come together to harness this opportunity of a large group to be able to ensure that our voices are taken into account and things end. So with, again, drawing it back to the fund, which is with giving courtesy of MacArthur in collaboration with Ford Foundation and Leap Africa. All this, I believe, through the fund launch, this shows that these organizations are keen to partner with youth who are in various sectors and are willing to take the conversations further, implement effective decisions that would show that, yes, youth voices are being reflected, their needs are being addressed, their aspirations are being catered for. So all this, I believe that once implemented, this will produce youth who are empowered, who are enlightened, and who are skilled to drive positive change with support from the aforementioned partners and even other organizations that key into this fund. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I am tempted to see if I can ask both Femi and Dabesaki to make only 1 minute comments, because I think we have like only about the next 12 minutes before we open up the floor. So, and then we have other questions together. But Dabesaki and Femi, Dabesaki first. Do you want to add anything to what thank you.
Sure, I can add one point and I would try to keep it to 1 minute. So I actually, endorse everything that Sarah has said. I think the one addition that I would include here is to look at the role that evidence plays, in thinking about the future. I think often my engagement with the youth policy space has been one of a lot of policies related to youth being made based on the individual perceptions of policymakers that develop these policies, and so in some sense, it's to really think about what role does evidence play here. And there are two entry points for me. One is to think about what young people have to say themselves. When we look at both this country and other countries in other regions, there's always a tension between youth aspirations and the ways in which policies are designed. I think about agricultural development policies in parts of the world, for example, where young people don't want to be on farms, but often, the argument for development has been that we need to invest in agriculture as a way to get young people to work. So in some sense, the entry point for me here is to really look at what do young people want themselves as a way to generate evidence that then influences the formulation of policies. And the second piece is basically to look at what does the research say about, about youth lives and policies that work for young people. I think in this regard, we really need to be thinking about, what we're finding from analysis in all of the areas that Sara has mentioned, education, agricultural development, job creation, and what have you, democratic participation, and to look at what is the evidence telling us, and to be guided by what the evidence tells us in thinking about the future. Because if we're thinking about 2050, that's a really long time, and without relying on the evidence, a lot of wrong choices would be made about the future. So I do think that engaging with both the academic and policy literature and really looking at what the evidence tells us, it's a strong and important way to look at the future. My final point here would be actually just going back to research that was supported by Goldman Sachs that, started this whole wave of Nigeria Vision 2020, and just the thinking about, what kinds of indicators we need to sustain, in order to have some kind of consistent development for young people in the country. We really need to be looking at how do we strengthen the opportunities for transition from education to employment, and really kind of figure out a way to make that happen in a way that touches both the macroeconomic dimensions of the country as well as individual opportunities for young people. Because if we don't, then we would continue this vicious cycle of making long-term development policies that turn out not to address the needs that young people really have.
Thank you. Dabesaki, you promised 1 minute, but you spoke for 3 minutes, but that's fine. Femi, next you. Do you want to add one thing? And 1 minute is 1 minute.
Excellent contribution, Sara and Dabesaki. I agree very, very, very seriously with the transition lens as we're trying to frame the future. Leap Africa, in our programming and in our work, we embrace the youth transition lens about 5 critical areas that young people need to be supported to transition successfully: education, employment, healthy behaviors and healthcare, social mobility, and finally, active citizenship. So those levels need to be strengthened. But I think my major contribution would be, as we're trying to frame the future, leveraging evidence, leveraging insights, I think the key thing is that youth agency, youth voice, youth creativity has to really, really be tapped into. And that's what the NYFF represents. Young people or youth is not a problem to be solved. It's a promise to and a possibility to unleash, actually. And that's what we're trying to do, that's one of the things we have to plug into the national narrative and the national visioning and development process. If we're talking about 2050, for instance, the vast majority, I've seen some of the committees that have been set up, the vast majority might not even be alive, biologically, by 2035. So we have to really, really give young people the space. Young people are doing extraordinarily well across industries, across sectors. We've seen that a lot of the economic growth indices have been driven by digital technology, creative industry, and the likes. And these are powered by youth and powered by young people. What we have to do is really bring the promise and the possibility that youth represent into national development. And we need to help policymakers and help political actors not see young people as a threat, that needs to be curtailed, or a threat that needs to be monitored, right? But as an asset that needs to be leveraged, as people who own the future, who own today and own the future, whose voices, whose creativity, need to be nurtured, need to be guided, need to be resourced and enabled. And that's why I'm excited about what we are gathered to talk about today and what we're launching today.
Thank you very much, Femi. I think the last point you made about can be captured in the concept of demographic dividend. So instead of thinking of young people as a problem, how do we think of them as actually a solution and as a right and as a solution to our problems as well? And the whole concept about demographic dividend is that, how can we invest in those things that makes our young people become productive members of our society, our community, and being what they are. And I think the point you made about the intersection about technology and entertainment is certainly one area that I think we should be paying attention to in other things. Although I don't want to take too much, but I just, as always, wanted to envisage a situation whereby the president of the country in his room and the other room has a clock that tells him all the time that, we have a vision about Nigeria in 2050. How many toilets do we need? So the clock is ticking and counting how many toilets do you want? How many water points do you need to create in order for you to have this large population take care of them? If we say now that we have 11 million children out of school, how many classrooms do you actually need now in order to take care of their education? And how many classrooms and teachers and head teachers and others do you need by the year 2050 in order to take care of those issues? And I am hoping that kind of the scenario building and other things is to have this clock created somewhere for every state government and to every the president of the country, put them in Abuja, the Unity Park, so that you have the clock ticking. You can see in the seconds how the seconds are moving and how the population is increasing and how the demand for water, electricity, toilets, teachers, nurses, and doctors are also increasing, so that people actually understand what does that mean for us to be the third largest population in the world. Maybe that way, in one of the ways in which we can freak their conscience and make them alive to their responsibilities as our people who have decided to seek for a vote. And for those of us who have not decided to seek for your votes, you know that we don't have responsibility. But those of you who say that you want our votes, then you need to know those numbers and take care of those responsibilities and other things. I know there are so many questions that we could have asked, but let me ask a question around, both Ford Foundation and MacArthur Foundation are very, very concerned about inclusion, gender inclusion, social inclusion, and other things. So I don't know, Dabesaki, whether you want to say anything in terms of how do you think this fund can respond to those issues around inclusion, especially from a youth perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Kole. I promise to keep it to 1 minute this time. So I think really that, let's start from the basics. The whole idea of the Youth Futures Fund is actually an attempt at inclusion, because often youth are treated, on the margins of serious interventions. And one example would be that we have been looking at the data with regard to national policies that focus on post-COVID recovery in countries. And we've found in the 4 countries where we've done deep dives, so Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, and Rwanda, that the issues of young people have been on the margins. They haven't been an explicit focus of recovery policies in countries. So just to be clear from the outset that the idea of the Youth Fund is really an attempt at inclusion. But within that is to look at also who are the minorities within the minorities, if we can think about young people as being minorities or a marginalized or excluded group. And within that, we would, work with Leap Africa to, of course, think about the usual suspects. We would think about the questions around gender. We would think about the questions around disability. We would think about the questions around location, you know, to make sure that there's some sort of, you know, explicit bias towards providing resources and support to young people who operate within these arenas. I think, Kole, the one thing that you and I and other colleagues have discussed extensively is the question of non-traditional youth groups, you know, and this is something that we would need to seriously think about, you know, as we think about how to operationalize this fund in terms of looking at town associations of young people, you know, that deal with important issues around development in their communities who may not fit our traditional frame of NGOs. You know, we need to figure out how do we get these youth groups involved in receiving resources to carry out work that matters for their communities, that matter for the future as well. So let me stop here so that I don't, you know, speak beyond the 1 minute I promised.
Thank you very much. And Taiwo, I think we are going to answer and build on really, I think that really Dabesaki has started answering the question. But the question is, which is probably one of the most important question is, if, for example, I'm a young person from somewhere, you know, how is this fund is going to operate? What is the operational mechanism? How am I going to apply? You know, what areas am I likely to get support? And also, probably one of the most important questions. So for this reason, we are going to give you 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me say that we don't have all the answers right now. So definitely, you want to pay attention to the website. We'll be having an FAQ session there and other things. But one thing that is very clear, I mean, from what Dabesaki said, is that the whole idea of this fund is about inclusion. So even in the design of how the fund will be administered, inclusion is very big. So one of the things I can share right now is that we're actually going to have a board set up for the fund, which is going to be, we're going to strive for inclusion on that board and representation on that board. That's one of the levels that we would, and the board for the fund would be responsible for making some of the key decisions, right? On what gets funded, who gets funded, and the likes. But there are 3 major critical pillars that the fund represents. It's not just about money. The first pillar is that we want to rally young people nationally and subnationally to interface with those who are presently envisioning the future of their nation and of the subnational regions to participate. So there's going to be a scenario planning visioning exercise as one critical activity of the fund. You know, so we're not waiting for them to call us. We would be taking young people to them and calling them to the table to design the future together with them. So that's one major aspect of the fund. The second aspect of the fund is something we've tagged youth leadership, just broadly. And that's where we would be doing some heavy sub-granting, a lot of sub-granting to other youth organizations, you know, other youth-led organizations that are trying to do things that are within the purview of what the fund represents and what the fund will sponsor. But beyond just giving resources, we've highlighted the need to build capacity, the need to connect all these practitioners together. So in that youth leadership pillar, we'll be giving funds, we would be building capacity, we would be connecting practitioners together because there's a lot of fragmentation in the youth leadership development system. And then the last pillar is now engaging mainstream youth, engaging young people, leveraging online pillars. Just to say that the fund is not about MacArthur or Ford Foundation or about Leap Africa. We are more or less just stewards, right? It's going to, the principle is all around partnership. So we see a lot of organizations participating at different levels, not just in terms of getting grants or being participants in capacity building programs, but even shaping some of the activities as we move on.
Thank you very much. I think we are now in the question and answer session, and I'm trying to remember because, you know, I am Generation A, so I don't remember many things that I had in the last things. I don't know whether it's Grace who is going to moderate the questions, or I'm the one, or I don't know, Dabesaki or somebody is supposed to do that. Grace, are you the one?
Hi, yes. Thank you so much for this very engaging and very rich conversation. And I can help to pose some questions from the audience. So the first one is from Dr. Zara Yusuf. And the question is, how can young girls be considered as a fraction of the youth population in Nigeria, especially in the northern part of the country? Will there be specific parts of this initiative that will be directed towards the needs of girls? Maybe Femi can tackle that question.
Thank you so much, Grace, for that question. We talked about inclusion from different dimensions. Regional inclusion, gender inclusion, PWD, and all forms of social and gender inclusion are being factored into this. So yes is the answer to that question. We are all about enabling young people, to better represent the needs of other young people, right? So for young girls in northern Nigeria, the issues facing young girls in northern Nigeria and other parts of Nigeria, the fund will also be supporting young people who are advocating for these issues, who are innovating around these issues, and who are orchestrating around those issues. I hope that helps.
Yes, absolutely. Looking for another question. So from Naji Julius, what do we do to ensure an all-inclusive participation in the process of assisting this fund? So again, I think there's a question also about people with disabilities, but is there specific ways that we can address the needs of that population as well?
Okay, I think I would answer then. Dabesaki seems to also want to contribute to that. PWD is one of the categories that we also identified in the JESI framework for this, gender and social inclusion framework for this. So even down from the board level, like I said, the different levels of the administration of the fund, and the way we are designing even participation and representation in everything that has to do with the fund, we're going to pay attention to that very seriously, actually. Beyond that also, we would also give voice. Our job is to enable and give voice to all forms of inclusion. As so far, the purview is youth, right? So for young people with that are innovating and advocating for issues related with people with disabilities and trying to bring that into the national discourse and into the national visioning exercise, we will definitely give voice and give a spotlight to that too, and resource those initiatives. Dabesaki.
Thank you, Femi, for not putting me on the spot. So, I think one of the things that really excites me about this fund is actually the opportunity to model how to do inclusion well at subnational level. In some sense, we have an extensive amount of history in advocating for and applying inclusion principles at national level. But we know that states are different, based on any number of factors, including, religious leaning, cultural histories, and what have you. And so one of the things that we extensively discussed in designing this program was really thinking about how do you do gender inclusion well in the states where that is an issue, for example, so both in terms of thinking about a disability as a specific dimension of inclusion, and gender as another dimension of inclusion, which I think came up in the previous question. We would really be looking at how do you model, and Femi started to talk about it, which is the idea of the working groups. So we are looking at a national level working group and state level, working groups that will engage and interface with the policy institutions at state level. The hope is that the state level working groups and the national level working groups, but especially the state ones, would actually help to model a good way to do inclusion work that applies a lot of the good practices that we know from global standards, but also shows the way for future initiatives that may be led by the Futures Fund or by other entities of state or non-governmental actors, in looking at supporting young people and working with young people. So an opportunity here is really a model, and I'm personally keen on working with Leap Africa and other colleagues to think, very closely and intentionally about inclusion throughout this work.
Thank you so much, Dabesaki. And we have a question from Funke, and the question is, will there be room for completely new actors or individual youth or new organizations working on criminal justice reforms to be part of this fund? And since that was especially relevant during the NSARS protests in 2020. So how will new people be able to get plugged in?
I can go. I think the answer is yes. I won't say more than that. The answer is yes.
Thank you. And Sarah, I think you had your hand up earlier, which I may have missed, but if you want to jump into the conversation.
Okay, so I just want to quickly respond to the first question that was asked on how young girls can be considered as a fraction of the youth population in Nigeria. My take on this is that it's not that they are not considered, they are already considered. I believe the appropriate question for this is that you're trying to consider what interventions would adequately be applicable to that region, if I'm to get your question correctly. So this is Zara Yusuf Ahmad from Yobe. So an interesting thing is that I have spent most of my life in the North. I was actually born in Yobe and I've stayed in the North for a long time. So I'm quite conversant with this. So in terms of considering interventions around this, is that there should be a shift in perception. It shouldn't be the case of looking at girls from such region as if they are helpless, they're in need of a solution, like their situation is quite critical, in as much as it might be, but you have to get to learn from them, you get to know the understandings, what makes that environment operate the way it is. Like there's a story about the case of a well and intervention having to create a well in a specific region where an organization came in, saw women fetching water from a river, and they had wondered why would women be fetching water from a river, and they tried to construct a well aside that river, and they found out that despite the construction of the well, the women still went back to the river, right? And they questioned why, what happened? And from their conversations with the women, they noticed that the women go there to fetch water, not because that is their only source of getting water, but more importantly, because it serves as an avenue for them to have like social interactions, for them to have a space to themselves. So that instance I'm giving it can also be applied to interventions, particularly in Northern Nigeria. Don't just look at it in the sense that, okay, you're coming into a space and you're providing solution. Let it be a co-creation of knowledge. Let it be a collaboration. Get to hear from the beneficiaries. They are very important. They are not just the beneficiaries, they are actors as well. They have a critical role to play. So the young girls have to be considered, and you could do this in collaboration with the traditional leaders, with the local leaders of the environment. And I believe that interventions based in this area would be much more effective when such is considered. So that's my take on the question.
Thank you. Apologies, I was on mute. We also have several questions about, do you have to be a non-governmental organization to be part of this fund or to apply? Is there a way for perhaps individual youth, or if they're not, again, part of that official, type of organization to participate?
Yeah, I think I can jump on that. So I just went through all the questions with the Q&A. I see a lot of questions around inclusion and participation in the fund. And so I think we've already spoken quite well on how the goal is inclusion. The goal is inclusion and participation. In terms of the specifics, I see questions around eligibility, how long is the fund for? The fund right now is considered as a 5-year fund. So the commitment we have right now is to sustain the fund for the next 5 years. So that's a direct answer to that question. In terms of participation in accessing the fund, one of the things in Leap Africa's work, even historically, we don't just resource. We have different categories of interventions targeting different groups of young people, targeting those who are formal, who are semi-formal, and who are grassroots informal youth organizations, in quotes, like groups. So this fund will pay attention to the different categories and the heterogeneous nature of youth organizing and youth organizations and youth communities that exist across the length and breadth of Nigeria. So it's definitely going to fund individuals. The criteria will be very clear. I mean, all this is going to fund individuals, it's going to fund organizations, it's going to fund community-based organizations, different categories of young people. Some of these things are being fashioned and being designed, but we don't even want to actively design some of the criteria without, in the spirit of inclusion, without the participation of the board that we're going to set up. So all of this will come up and will be spelled out in the website when we go when we put that there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And speaking of the website, the Nigeria Youth Futures Fund will be at nigeriayouthfund.org. So please sign up, add your email, and as these details are formed, you can get the latest updates there. So I also want to hand it over now, since we just have about a minute left of our event, to Dabesaki to introduce the new regional director for West Africa for Ford Foundation.
Yay! Thanks, Grace and Kole and Femi and Sara and everyone really for making the time to be part of this event. I think my task is really simple, which is to announce and introduce the recently appointed Regional Director for West Africa for the Ford Foundation, Dr. Chichi Anyagolu Okoye, who's on this call and who was elected not to speak. But if you can turn your video on, maybe, Chichi, just so that we get a sense of. So here you go. That's Chichi. Welcome to the Ford Foundation, and yeah, so I think I've done my task. I'm not sure if I should turn it back to you, Grace, or
yes, that works. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining. We really appreciate all the great interest in our fund. Again, we encourage you to join us on social media. I believe all the accounts are in the chat, but we will also share a recording with everyone after the event, everybody who registered. And again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We're really excited and hope that you'll be part of this great effort. So thank you again to all of our panelists, and take care.